The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'll be joined by Bob Lowry, and we're going to do a series of What Would Bob Do episodes. In this first part, I'm going to ask Bob what would he do if he got to a pool where the pH is constantly rising, and what would he do if he's riding with you and you go to the supplier and you can't find any kind of chlorine, liquid, cal-hypo, or dichlor tablets of that nature, and how would he handle that situation. And one thing that I don't really do with my podcast is share a lot about my guests and get really personal. I think my podcast is geared mainly towards information, but I think you should know that Bob Lowry does suffer from a lung disease. And in this podcast and in this series that he recorded with me, you can hear his oxygen machine in the background of the recording as he's talking. And he also has some other health issues he's dealing with. And so I left kind of the pre-roll in here so you can hear me talking to Bob a little bit about his lung disease. So you kind of know that Bob Lowry is really spending a lot of his time and utilizing his time to help those of us here that listen to his podcast. And it's really altruistic of him to actually give his time when he has these health conditions. To the listeners, I think, if you are a praying person, pray for Bob Lowry's health and continued good health or recovery. But let's jump into the podcast and you'll hear Bob Lowry explain the lung disease that he's dealing with. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Also receive priority service, enhanced rebate programs, a discount on your general liability insurance through SPA, a discount on your pool riding software through Skimmer, and an opportunity to co-brand with Leslie's on your social media, website, truck, and more. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.
Yeah, well, I went to UCLA and spoke with the lung doctors, and overall, they're pleased. This disease, they told me I had 5 years to live, and in November it'll be 6 years, and so they're surprised that I've lived that long anyway.
Yeah,
and they did a lung test, and my lung capacity is down another 12%, and it was already down to 45. So at the moment, I only have 33% of my lung capacity. So, and that's the reason today, since I'm going to be talking a little longer, that I have this oxygen cannula in my nose. It's supplying a small amount of oxygen. So when I found that, because I monitor it pretty regularly, I found that when I speak for, 4 or 5 minutes at a time without much of a break, I sometimes get into a little oxygen debt. So this will just prevent that.
Well, let's jump in. That way we don't use up too much of your time. Today I'm joined by Bob Lowry, and he's, of course, the renowned chemistry expert in the industry. Basically, he's written tons of material and taught tons of courses, and he's joining us today to go over some questions here. And I titled this, What Would Bob Do? We're going to put Bob out there in the field alongside you, and he's going to show up at the service account with you. And so the first question is, you get to your account, or you have an account where the pH every week is just 8+, it's always high. Bob's there with you now at the poolside. What would Bob do in this situation?
Okay, well, there's probably 3 or 4 reasons that the pH is always going up in your pool, or in any pool for that matter. But there are some, first of all, things to check. And the first thing is that if your pH is always going up, my first answer would probably be that your alkalinity is too high. High alkalinity causes CO2 off-gassing, and CO2 off-gassing causes the pH to go up. 120, 130, 140, something like that. You could put acid in today, and tomorrow the pH is going to be right back up. And the reason is that the CO2 off-gassed and it pulled the pH back up. If you actually add enough acid to lower the alkalinity to the proper level, instead of just lowering the pH to the proper level, you'll probably solve most of the problem. A lot of people add acid, but they only add enough acid to get the pH back down to 7.5. And that leaves the alkalinity high, and so the pH goes right back up. If you add enough acid to lower the alkalinity down to, say, 80 or 90, then the pH is going to stay there. If the alkalinity is high, it's going to raise the pH. The other reasons that you can have high pH are that you may have a chlorine generator, a saltwater pool. And saltwater pools raise the pH in the pool for two reasons. First of all, they make sodium hydroxide in the cell, and sodium hydroxide raises pH. The other thing is that we make hydrogen gas in the cell, but hydrogen gas is not very soluble in water. As a result, it makes a bubble. And so we have lots of little bubbles being formed in the chlorine generator. And because there's several plates inside the cell, it creates a lot of turbulence. So essentially, gases in water that are moving create aeration. And so we have aeration and turbulence right in the cell. That causes the pH to go up because aeration and turbulence off-gas CO2 out of the pool, out of the water. Chlorine generator is raising the pH in the pool for two reasons, aeration and turbulence, and it makes sodium hydroxide. So the pH of the pool is always going to go up. There are some things you can do if you have a saltwater chlorine generator. And that is, my first thing to tell you would be to add borate to the pool. And by adding borate to the pool, it keeps the pH from going up as high or as fast, and it prevents algae. And because it prevents algae, by the way, preventing algae doesn't mean it kills it. So you can't put borate in a pool to get rid of algae. But you can put borate in a pool to prevent it from ever happening. So you put the borate in the pool, and then the chlorine doesn't have to kill that algae that gets introduced. And because it doesn't need to kill that algae to get introduced, the chlorine generator doesn't need to run as long. And because it doesn't run as long, it doesn't increase the pH as much. There's a great reason to use borate in your pool if you have a chlorine generator. The chlorine generator will be on less time, which means the pH won't be going up as much. And also it will extend the life of the chlorine generator because it's not on as long. That takes care of two of the reasons, I think. And the other reason is that if you have any kind of aeration going on in the pool, and this can be a waterfall, a negative edge pool, a spillover, some kind of a fountain or a rock formation, anything that's making turbulence where water is falling or being mixed up a lot, that creates aeration and turbulence. And aeration and turbulence cause CO2 to leave the water. And because of the equilibrium reactions in the water, the pH of the pool goes up. I got a call from a guy one day, said, I've got a pool that's got a 360-degree negative edge, and the drop is about 8 feet. And I said, you're never going to ever get the pH down in that pool. Every time it runs, you've got all this water falling over and creating turbulence. And there's no way to keep the pH down in that pool. It's not possible. If you've got, spillovers, if you've got combination pool and spa, where the spa is being used and spilling over into the pool, you're going to always have the pH going up. But there's things you can do. You can, if you have rock formations or waterfalls or stuff, maybe they can only be turned on when the people are home, or at least when they're at home and awake. At a point in running, if everybody's asleep from midnight to 5 in the morning, there's no point in having the waterfall on. So perhaps you can set the timers to come on only when the people might be watching. Mm-hmm. So that's a possibility. Maybe set the pump to run at a slower speed or a high speed when they're not home and a slow speed when they are. Some way to adjust it either by variable speed or with timers. And those are probably the biggest reasons that you may have. You can also actually have, there's one other reason that you can have aeration, and that's if you have a suction leak. If you have a suction leak in the plumbing, the air is coming in through the leak. But when it gets to the pump, it's being circulated and aerated at like crazy inside the pump. And that creates a little bit of cavitation, but it also creates a lot of CO2 off gassing. And so the pH is going up in the pool because you've got a suction leak.
And I wonder, Bob, too, sometimes the automatic cleaner, the suction side cleaner, is attached to a side port or even in the skimmer, and there is some cavitation in the pump because, if you know, the cleaners have a small hole in the bottom.
Right, yes.
So would that contribute to pH going up also?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if the pump is cavitating, you've got the pH going up. So,
yeah.
And I tell this to people a lot. If you don't believe what I'm saying about aeration and turbulence causing the pH to go up, next time you go to a spa that you can just run the spa without running the pool. Next time you go to the spa, put in a little bit of acid and run the pH down to, say, 7.0 or 7.2 or something like that. And then turn everything on, the pumps, the jets, the boosters, whatever you got. Turn it all on, go clean the pool for 10 or 15 minutes or go do some other maintenance. And when you come back in 15 minutes, see what the pH has done. And you're going to find that the pH is up around 7.8 or 8 in only 15 minutes. And every person I've ever told that to said, I am amazed. I can't believe that's happening. And it does. And it happens very fast in the spa.
That's pretty good. And I think one thing also we should note is, you can probably tell by showing up at the pool that it's a new pool, but you may take over an account and not know when the pool was built. But if the pool was built in the last 6 months or so, or within that 6-month period, if it's a plaster pool, wouldn't that have also a higher acid demand?
Yes, it will, because during probably the first, I don't know, I've heard various numbers, but anywhere from a year to even up to 3 or 4 years, the plaster and concrete are still curing. And in the curing process, we create calcium hydroxide, and we also are leaching a little calcium and a little alkalinity back into the pool. So on a new pool, you're going to have the pH increasing all the time along with the alkalinity.
Yeah, that's something that I think they should be aware of because I get calls once in a while from someone, and I always ask them, so when was the pool built? And they said about a month ago, and that's kind of like an indicator that that's probably an issue they're dealing with. Besides having a saltwater generator and water features, I mean, all these can make the pH just go bananas. If you have all those in combination.
Sure.
Here's another one, and this happened this season a lot, and I think I know your answer to this, but you show up at a local supplier, and again, you're riding in the truck with this pool guy, and they go to their local Leslie's or SCP, and there's no chlorine, there's no tablets, there's no dichlor, there's no liquid, there's no cal hypo. What's your next step to get some chlorine?
Well, first of all, again, and listen, I only sell education. I don't sell any chemicals. And you've heard me mention borate every time I get a chance. But putting borate in the pool is going to prevent algae. And if you don't have any algae in your pool now and you put some borate in there, it's going to prevent it. So even if you don't have some chlorine, you can at least prevent the algae by having the borate in the pool. So aside from that, there are other places to buy chlorine. They're not usual, and it's not approved by EPA, but nonetheless, you can go to the grocery store and buy bleach. And the only thing to do is make sure when you buy bleach is that it says that there's nothing in it. No smells, no fragrances, no thickeners, no anything in it that is just pure bleach. And pure bleach that you buy at the grocery store is about 1/2 of the concentration of the pool chlorine that you buy at the pool store. So you can find bleach at grocery stores, big box stores, Home Depots, those kinds of places. You can find bleach. You can also go to janitorial supply places and find bleach and acid there, believe it or not. Sometimes they may not have muriatic acid, but they might have sulfuric acid. The sulfuric acid that's about 38% is very close in amounts to the muriatic acid that we use in the pool industry. I just need to be a little more careful with spilling it on you because it's a little more dangerous to skin. The 38% doesn't fume very much. The stronger the acid, the more it fumes. So sulfuric acid, when it's strong, can fume quite a bit. But the other thing is with dry acid and liquid acid, sulfuric acid, you're adding sulfate to the pool. And sulfate, when it builds up, can start to be a problem.
Yeah, so that's the easy solution, and I think I already kind of knew your answer to that one. Here's another one that I got a call yesterday, in fact, where if you're testing the water with a reagent test kit and you get an odd reading, and for this person, she was doing the calcium hardness, and it came out pink. It was coming out a weird color. And then I said, well, do you have any test strips to kind of double check what's going on? And she didn't have any. She didn't carry test strips in her truck. So when you're getting an odd reading with your reagent test kit, what's the first thing to look for, and what would be some logical things to do to kind of get an accurate reading?
Well, most of the time, I would say the two biggest interferences are probably high chlorine level and metals in the water. Both of those things can cause strange readings on a lot of your tests. I think that would possibly be the best thing to do is to do that. The other thing that you can possibly do is, depending on where you are, you can go to a Leslie's or one of the places that has stores everywhere and free water testing, and just take a sample down there and have them check it. And I do believe as a backup, you should either have another test system or some test strips on your truck. And that way, if you're out there and you get a strange reading, maybe you can use another test method and see if you still get the same bad reading. But usually high chlorine and either copper iron in the water can cause some serious problems with testing.
And I know we don't like talking about a specific product, but this is one reason why I really am promoting the Lamont Color Q2X Pro 9, because it has a copper and iron reagent or a tablet that you can test for that. And this particular person that called me didn't have any way to test for metals. And I think if you're doing pool service, it's really critical to get a test kit that can do copper and iron, because that is one of the interference factors of a reagent test kit, right?
Well, yeah, not only that, but if you have high iron in the pool, it can use up a lot of chlorine. Iron is one of the big things that use up chlorine. So having a high iron level in the pool is something that's going to use up a lot of chlorine. But you do need to have a good test system. And, the Color Q, as you said, the Color Q2, I guess their 9 model has both of the copper and iron in it. Maybe if you want the high end, you could even use the spin touch. A lot of service guys are using spin touches, and there's pretty much zero operator error. The only error you could make is not getting a good sample and then squirting it into that disc wrong. And that's it. But once you've done that, there's nothing else you can change. So it's done. But and guys say, well, gee, I don't have $700 or $800 to buy one of those, and $2 per disc or $3 per disc or whatever it is. But my answer to that is, oh yeah, how much did the truck cost that you're driving around in? And these guys are driving around in $50,000 pickup trucks, and then they complain they don't want to spend $600 or $700 on a test kit. And which one do they use more? Yeah, sure, they drive around, but they're actually depending their livelihood on getting the test results so they can add the right chemicals to keep the water safe and perfect for the homeowner. So the test kit is about one of the most important things they ever use.
That's funny. I mean, it's so true, and I think we've said this many times. They have to have a good test kit to be a professional out there. Here's another one. You're in an area where it rains a lot, and there's 4 inches of rain predicted the next day. You're out there servicing your pools, and you know the forecast for the week is going to be 4 inches of water just in one day. What are some of the things you can do to the pool, to prepare for a storm like that? Or if anything, should you, shock the pool or do anything differently?
Yeah, I think if you know for sure a storm is going to be coming, you may want to, I don't know, I've heard it both ways. You may want to overfill the pool a little bit so when it rains, it doesn't actually fill the pool anymore. The water just kind of hits and runs off with the rest of it. The other thing is you could lower the pool level and it'll fill it back up. In any case, when it rains, it brings in the nitrous oxide and some of the pollutants that are in the atmosphere, and it brings it into the pool. And so we get nitrates and nitrites building up in the water, and they can cause algae blooms and use huge amounts of chlorine. If you know it's coming, if you can put a little extra chlorine in, put 3 or 4 parts per million extra of chlorine into the pool, put in a residual, if you will, of monopersulfate or non-chlorine shock. Put that in the pool to kind of do it in advance so that you're not trying to play catch up. It's easier to get rid of things, just as a doctor tells you, it's easier to prevent things than it is to cure them after they happen. And so if you can know that things like that are going to happen, you can maybe prepare for it a little bit by increasing the sanitizer and the oxidizer in the pool.
Yeah, and I think if most pool techs are like me, I'm always looking at the 10-day forecast, like all the time. We're kind of obsessed with weather, so it'd be pretty cool to have like a weather app inside of some of the apps that we use regularly so we know the weather for the week.
I try to get service techs to start partnering a little better with the homeowners, with the pool owners. And the reason is that if they're going to have a pool party or they're going to have a bunch of people over or something like that, if you plan for it and know it's going to happen, it's a lot easier than, you showing up on Monday and they had, over the weekend, they had 40 people get in the pool altogether, and you're trying to say, what the hell happened to this pool? There's zero chlorine. There's a lot of chloramines. I got all this stuff in the pool. What the heck happened? And you're trying to catch up and you have no idea that there was a pool party. So if you can partner a little bit with the homeowners, it's maybe a little better. Sometimes, when you're switching, if you can't get tabs anymore, or you're trying to get away from using tabs because the CYA is building up too much, one of the strategies is to leave a little bit of chlorine with the pool owner and have them pour it in the middle of the week. And that's a pretty good strategy. It saves money from every angle because you don't have to buy a liquidator, you don't have to buy a peristaltic pump and put that in and all of that. You just leave a half a gallon of chlorine with them, and in midweek, just tell them to pour it in the pool. It takes 5 seconds. They don't need to make any tests. They don't need to do anything. You need to go outside, open the container, pour it in the pool, and close it back up. They're done. And that keeps chlorine in the pool all week long because you don't want the pool to run out of chlorine 3 days after you're there and no chlorine for 3 or 4 days. So
yeah, good point. I think that's an important aspect to get through the tough times we're having with chemicals. And I think the next season we're going to probably run into a shortage in a similar fashion. I haven't heard anything about the Biodex factory schedule. I know that the last I heard was May 2022 they're going to be back online for the trichlor, but there was another hurricane that hit a few weeks ago. So I'm not even sure if that timeline is still accurate. So I don't know. I think in 2022 we're going to be running into the same chemical issues we're having in 2021.
Sure. you reminded me as you were talking about that. One of the things I have mentioned to people recently is if they want to save chlorine, one of the ways to save chlorine is to probably keep a higher residual than you've been keeping. And people are like, what? How does that save me any money? And the answer is that we have been recommending now, I've been recommending for 9 years, people use a chlorine level that is a percentage of cyanuric acid. And if you use a percentage of cyanuric acid, the recommended percentage that we recommend is 7.5% of cyanuric acid as the minimum chlorine residual. And if you put borate in the pool, then that 7.5% becomes 5%. So we use 5% of CYA as your chlorine residual. But the advantage is that if you use that amount, you probably are old school enough to remember what we say is breakpoint chlorination. By using 5% of CYA with borate in the pool, we are at breakpoint all the time or above it. And so as ammonia and sunblock and saliva and everything else are introduced into the pool, they're immediately oxidized because there's enough chlorine in the pool to destroy those things. And the problem with keeping a lower residual is that as ammonia and other organics are introduced into the pool, there's not sufficient chlorine to destroy them. And as a result, chlorine combines with them. And that's where you get combined chlorine and chloramines and nitrates and disinfection byproducts and all those kinds of things. And then you have to put even more chlorine in to get rid of them. And if you were keeping a higher residual, they would be destroyed as they are introduced. And think about this, by increasing the chlorine residual, once you attain the new higher level, the chlorine demand in your pool doesn't actually change. People will say, well, I can't afford to do that. But the only difference is, if you're keeping a chlorine level at 1 and you decide to keep it at 4, the only difference is the increase in the amount of chlorine to go from 1 to 4. Once you get to 4, you have the same demand in your pool that you've always had. You know, if you got 3 kids getting into the pool every week, you got the same 3 kids getting in the pool every week. If you got sunlight every day, you got the same sunlight every day. So the demand didn't change. But by keeping a higher residual, all of the organics that are introduced are destroyed as they're introduced. Mm-hmm. And so you don't get the chlorine level low and then start to get combined chlorine and stuff. So it's actually better to keep a higher residual than it is to keep a lower residual.
Yeah, that way you're not shocking your pool, adding chlorine to bring it back up.
And you don't need to weekly shock your pool. You won't need an algicide. You won't need an enzyme. You won't need a phosphate removers. You won't need all those specialty chemicals that cost a lot of money.
Yeah, so as an example, if your cyanuric acid was at 80, you would keep, if you had borates, you would keep the free chlorine level at 4 parts per million.
That's right. And this points out the fact that I'm saying that you need 4 parts per million to keep algae from growing, to keep everything from happening. And the PHTA says the guideline is 2 to 4 parts per million. But you can see from what I've just gone through, 4 parts per million would be fine, 2 parts wouldn't be. Mm-hmm. So the guideline's a little bit odd, and that's one of the reasons that we have suggested for almost 10 years that you use a percentage of cyanuric acid as your free chlorine residual.
That makes perfect sense. I know we got off track with that one there.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for the listener to know that this is an important factor in any kind of chemistry treatment of the pool. And this kind of leads into the next question anyway, so that it's kind of good that we went over that. So you get a call and they want you to do a bid on an Airbnb rental. It's 20,000 gallons of water. How would you bid this Airbnb that you know is going to get heavy use? And we just talked about the free chlorine level that's kind of necessary to prevent algae and problems. So here's the Airbnb, and how would you quote service for this?
Well, even though this is a residential pool, because it's in a residential area and it's, usually a one family, one pool type of thing, because you have it being a rental and multiple families possibly renting it, you really do have a commercial pool. This is no longer a residential pool. This is a commercial pool, and it needs to be treated like a commercial pool. And you need to keep a heavy amount of chlorine in there. You need to, I would say that you at least need to have a twice a week service minimum, and you need to make another call every time somebody leaves. And so you may be making a 2 call a week, and you may be having a third call depending on how often they rent the house and when somebody leaves. And I think that's just, and you may even have to do some automation. They may need to put a controller in to try to control the pH and the chlorine level, because sometimes these people, they rent to 2 or 3 families and they got kids and everything. You got 10 or 15 people getting in the pool in one day, and the chlorine level goes to 0 on day 1, and they're going to be there for a week, and you're not going to come for 2 more days because you're going to come twice a week. They could be 2 days without chlorine. It puts it in the category of being a commercial pool. And in commercial pools, even in a not very busy commercial pool, you need to check the chlorine level daily. And in some pools, hourly or 3 or 4 times a day, and you're trying to do it by 1 or 2 calls a week. I don't think that's not smart. Somebody's going to get sick in one of those pools, and then they're going to start looking at who they're going to sue. And they're going to sue the homeowner, but then they're going to say, hey, I had this pool guy taking care of the pool. It's his fault.
Yeah.
And it puts you in the position of being at fault. And you're trying to treat this as a residential pool, and the Airbnb owner is trying to save some money. He doesn't want to have you to come out there every day. And he's really got a commercial pool, and he's trying to get away with paying residential prices.
And I'll throw this out there too. In LA County, the commercial pool free chlorine level is 10 parts per million. They'll allow you to have it up to 10 parts per million. So I don't think it would be a bad idea in the situation to keep that level at a kind of a commercial pool level of chlorine, right?
That's right. And I would, I don't know that you should keep it at 10, but I would certainly run it up to 10 and then let it go back down. But my minimum would still be what I say is the minimum.
Yeah.
It's 5% of CYA. And if you got 50 CYA at 5%, you got 2.5 parts per million minimum of chlorine. And so, run it up to 10. When it gets down to 2.5, put some more in. And, another strategy that I've talked with, trying to figure out what to do with some of these, because the guys are calling me about it. And one of the strategies is not to leave chlorine at the pool because it's kind of dangerous, but you can leave some monopersulfate or some non-chlorine shock. And one of the best strategies is to ask the renters if they will, each time they finish and get out of the pool for the day, if they'll put in 2 cups or a pound or this jar or something of monopersulfate. Just throw it in the pool. And that will at least go a long way towards oxidizing the organics that they brought in for that day. And it doesn't expose them to very dangerous chemicals. He was going to try to set up in this one pool, he was going to set up a 1 pound either jar or bag kind of system where every time at the end of the day, they open a bag and throw it in the pool. And then he comes twice a week. That's one of the strategies. Of course, you start to look at feed systems because you're going to need you're going to need at least 1 part per million of chlorine in the pool every day, just due to sunlight for the most part. And then with bathers and stuff, you may need another 1 part with that many bathers. So you need to get 2 parts per million of chlorine in the pool every day. So it is possible to set up a peristaltic pump, for instance, and liquid chlorine and feed the equivalent of 2 parts per million of chlorine in the pool. In a 15,000 gallon pool, you're probably looking at feeding about a quart of chlorine a day.
And I think this goes back to what you said about communicating with the customer. And, with Airbnb rental, the, I guess, quote unquote landlord should know that they can add something into the cleaning fee with the Airbnb to cover another pool visit. So educate the owner of the Airbnb that, look, if someone moves out, I'm going to come back that day to make sure the pool is okay for the new residents that come in. And that should be something that you charge them in the cleaning fee, but they should know they can pass that fee on to the people that are going to use their house.
Yeah, one of the guys that I talked to said that it was kind of a problem because, he's got a route to do, and all of a sudden the Airbnb owner calls and said, okay, they just left. I got a new one coming in tomorrow. Can you come out today and take care of the pool? And that kind of became a problem because he's got travel time, back and forth and time spent there trying to get the pool ready for the next one. And it just got to be a pretty big hassle.
Yeah.
And so he tried to talk them into just doing maybe, 2 or 3 calls a week and then setting up some kind of a dispensing system for liquid chlorine.
I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for a larger company to have one of their employees that's kind of floating around and maybe advertise as an Airbnb specialist. And then,
yeah, sure.
I mean, they can make a lot of money doing this kind of service, and they can on the spot get someone over there. But I think the one pollers would have trouble with Airbnb for sure, because we can't drop everything and go over there. It would be very frustrating. Again, to learn more about Bob Lowry and for his certified residential course, you can go to pcti.online. And that'll give you that's his actual website, and it'll give you all the materials that he publishes, and also the registration for his certified residential course. And you can also find other podcasts that I recorded in this series with Bob by going to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon. That'll take you to a menu, and you can just type Bob Lowry in the search box. Then all the podcasts that I recorded with Bob Lowry will pop up there for you. Listen to those at your leisure. I think Bob has some great information to share with you there. And if you're in the industry and want to enhance your business, definitely check out my coaching program at poolguycoaching.com. You can also learn more about my coaching program on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.